Defense Argument Findings by Circuit Defense Counsel. Lieutenant, members, trial counsel is absolutely right. Drug activities tend not to happen in front of nuns. That's true. But when the government parades these non-nuns into a court-martial and then puts them up on the stand and tries to use their word to put Captain Larson in jail, they've got to take the good with the bad. You've got to take all of the baggage that comes with these people and you assess their credibility. You are absolutely entitled to consider the fact that they are not nuns. And that fact alone, the fact that these people may not, in fact, be credible enough for you to find reasonable doubt in this case. Trial counsel was very passionate, very definitive, very conclusory. That's commendable. It's also not evidence, because the reality is, if you step back from this case, if you step back and you can take a detached, non-emotional look at the evidence here, if you see logic and reason, you will recognize that the government's case is built on a house of cards. And that house of cards is built on a very shaky foundation. And that foundation, members, I submit to you, is Ms. Bree Larson. It's a very shaky foundation. She's the reason for all of this. She's why we're here. And so it only makes sense to talk a little bit about that. Is there any real denial that on February 24th, 2018, Ms. Larson was incredibly upset? Not at the world, not at God, at him, pointing to Kevin. She was upset with Captain Kevin Larson, her husband. Let's just get that out there. And in her emotional state, I asked her about it, and she wouldn't even admit that she was jealous. This is a little issue. This is something that really, at the end of the day, should have been a minor point and move on. But right from the jump, she wouldn't admit that she's jealous. No, I'm not. I'm not a jealous person. Okay, well, didn't you tell your doctor that you are a jealous person? No, I don't remember saying that. And then you confront her with it. All right, I said it, but it's because Captain Larson was tormenting me and he's such a horrible person, and that's why I said it. It just builds. This is not hard. Why are you fighting me on such a simple point? Just say that you're jealous. It's true, right? And never mind the fact that she says that in January of 2018, when she has this appointment with her doctor and she talks about being jealous and claims that she only said that because Captain Larson treats her so poorly. No, because what did she say? Captain Larson, prior to the 24th, always cared and treated her and watched out for her happiness and her health prior to 24 February 2018. This was January. So she can't have it both ways, right? She can't. When it's convenient, he's mean and easy. He's the worst thing alive. And when it's not convenient, well, he's wonderful. He always took care of me. Those things can't coexist in the same universe. But it really doesn't matter at the end of the day, because regardless of what Miss Larson says, she's absolutely 100% based on her conduct, jealous and angry and mad on 24 February 2018. Why? Because she believes that her husband has been unfaithful to her. She believes that he has betrayed her. Those are her words. This is not an overdrawn melodrama from the defense. This is not us overdoing the situation. Those were her words. She had been betrayed. She was pissed off. Her words. This entire court-martial, this entire event was precipitated because of the events of 24 February 2018. And what did she tell you? Again, going back, I'm not jealous. This is not what's driving this. Captain Larson, and we'll get to this in a minute, but it's very telling that Captain Larson wasn't responding when she threw the whiteboard in his direction or broke it off the wall. She wanted him to know something. She wanted him to know that that doesn't mean anything to me anymore. And she broke the plant. And that plant had symbolism for her. That type of plant grows where they went on their honeymoon. She wanted him to show her that he cared. And what made her so angry, he didn't. She broke the whiteboard. She breaks the plant. And he still walks away. He is disengaging from her, and he's not giving her what she said, the attention, the response that she wanted. He didn't show her he cared. And she said she felt he was picking the other woman. So what did she do? She upped the ante. She doesn't go upstairs and pack her bag. She doesn't say, "That's it, I'm out of here." No. Bree Larson, in this epitome of reason and logic, of credibility and trustworthiness, no, she freaks out and she escalates and she goes and finds his phone and she starts to smash it to pieces. That's what everyday people do, right? She goes up and she starts to smash his phone to pieces because she's angry. She couldn't get her way. She didn't get what she wanted. And you don't mess with Bree, right? At this point, she's made a giant mess. She's smashing stuff all over the place. That's what she's doing. And so on the 24th of February, 2018, she decides she's going to burn him. She's going to burn him. So she falsely accuses him of a whole host of offenses: drug offenses, possession, use, distribution, Molly, psilocybin, mushrooms, LSD. She just lets it fly, right? But again, let's now look at the timeline. Trial counsel talked to you about the timeline. What happens? Time heals all wounds, right? And we move from January into March. Maybe I still love you. Maybe we can still salvage this thing. Maybe we can still give this a go. But also, maybe I need to undo what I did. So she writes a letter on 26 March 2018, and she says the stuff that was found in the house, it actually wasn't Captain Larson's. It was mine, right? Because now she's not mad at him anymore. Now they're going to make something out of this, but she's got to undo what she did. And then she writes another letter because, again, in April 18, 2018, they are still in love. They are going to give it a go. He might be able to rectify this, salvage this thing. And she writes a more passionate letter. She writes more details. She says, "No kidding, that stuff was not Kevin's, it was mine." She talks about her debilitating anxiety. She talks about having to be rushed to the ER while she's at work. She talks about how Captain Larson helped her, how he was trying to assist her in treating that anxiety, but that what Captain Larson was helping her with wasn't necessarily getting it done. So she took it upon herself to try to find something that might help her. She didn't like the prescription medication she's been given. She talked to a friend, and she says that's how she came across microdosing. Make no mistake about it, she did not testify that Kevin Larson told her about microdosing. She talked to a friend. A friend told her about it, and that's how she decided to deal with her anxiety. That's what she wanted to do to save her marriage. Now, lest there be any doubt in your mind that Bree Larson is a jealous woman, what happens in June? What happens in June? In June of 2018, she now believes their marriage is done. It's over. Why? Because in her mind, he went on a hike with a little girlfriend. He wasn't forthcoming about it. She found out from photos, and now she's going to burn him to the ground. And so she goes back to OSI. They didn't come to her. She reaches back to the OSI, and she says, "You know, those retractions, I want to retract those retractions. I want to reinstate the allegations, and I've got more information for you. I've got more information than what I told you the first time." Because she's angry, she's jealous, and she's vindictive, and she's going to end him if she can. As we go through all of the evidence that you had for the last several days, don't forget that this is the context in which all of this comes about. This is the backdrop of everything that's occurring in this case. This marital discord between Kevin Larson and Bree Larson, the ups and downs of their relationship, and you can absolutely track by the status of their marriage, by the events that Bree Larson takes. When times are good, they're good, but when they are bad, they're the worst. Keep that in mind as we go through this. I'll delve more deeply into each of these, but let's start with the allegations of drug use. The allegation that Kevin Larson engaged in drug use, with the exception of Ms. Larson. Who did you hear from in this court-martial say that they ever actually saw Kevin Larson use drugs? Who actually said, I saw him use drugs. Anybody other than Ms. Larson? Okay, so when there are witnesses that don't come into this court-martial, you're saying, I would have liked to have known that they would have said about this you hold against them. That's them, not Captain Larson. He doesn't have any burden, responsibility, anything. He did not ask to be here. So, where is the party crew? Not a single member. No one. And make no mistake about it, it probably would have been helpful information for you to figure out what's really going on here. It's kind of crazy, you know? The military can do amazing things. We can put satellites in space. We can operate an aircraft halfway across the world. We can find Saddam Hussein in a hole in the middle of Iraq. But we can't find the party crew to shed some light for you on what's actually going on here, can we? It's on them. You hold them responsible for that. Maybe they just weren't going to say what the government thought they were going to say, or what the government wanted them to say. Objection. With regard to drug use, what about this leave business, right? Ms. Larson was very clear. After every festival, every EDC, he would always take leave. Always. Those were her words, always. Well, you have his leave records. EDC 2016, where's the leave? Not on there. Trial counsel made a big deal about local area. Well, EDC 2017, he was in Salt Lake City. That's where that leave was. So he wasn't just hanging around, kicking around Las Vegas. He was in Salt Lake. What about all those other festivals beyond Wonderland? Where is the leave? Where is the correlation? He always did it. There's all his drug use. There's all his ramping drug activity that he needs to recover from. Where is it? Where is all the leave? The fact that you have leave records in front of you and he takes leave and he stays in the local area without more, that's evidence that he does exactly what the military expects him to do. Take his leave, use it. That's why we're given it. So, without some correlation, without them being able to show you, well, here's when Beyond Wonderland happened, here's Nocturnal whatever these EDC type festivals are, without them saying, here's the correlation, here's the leave, here's the correlation, here's the leave. That's just a lot of talk from Miss Larson. That's all that is talk. They have one time where one of these festivals lines up with his leave. And again, that's the one time he doesn't even stay in the local area. So he's not just laying around recuperating. He traveled out of state to Salt Lake City. Let's talk about distribution of drugs. Where are all the people that Captain Larson allegedly distributed drugs to? Right, the government is trying to kingpin him. Massive amounts of ecstasy. So much so, there's no way he could use it all himself. So where did it all go? Who's it going to? Bree Larson says that it goes to these friends, but okay, let's collaborate on that. Let's bring the friends in. Let's bring the party crew in. Let's have them take the stand and say, did Captain Larson ever give you drugs? Nowhere to be found. But more than that, he would give to all sorts of people they just met, perfect strangers at these festivals, and yet they couldn't find a soul. Possession of drugs. What evidence is there that Captain Larson possessed drugs? Did they seize drugs? Did they seize some drugs at the house? Ms. Larson claims they belonged to Captain Larson. Okay, and the government says, well, the forensics show. Let's be very clear what the forensics do and do not show. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, I want to be very clear. The reality is that the drugs in question in this case, they absolutely belonged to Ms. Bree Larson. She came in here and she testified that they didn't, but on 2 occasions previous to this court-martial, she made statements emphatically asserting they were hers. Objection misstating. So then you have to make that determination, all right? She came in here, she said, not mine, on 2 separate previous occasions, and she said they absolutely were mine. Which is it? Which is it? And the military judge, and he did not instruct, and he will not instruct you, that it is not a defense that if the drugs belonged to Ms. Larson, that doesn't mean he's not guilty. If those drugs only belonged to Ms. Larson, if those were her drugs, he is not guilty of possessing those drugs? Absolutely, he is not. Captain Larson is not responsible for every single thing that is found in that house, right? You don't have to abandon your common sense and ways of the world. Absolutely not. People who live together still have his things, her things, even though they live in the same house. Those drugs belonged to Ms. Larson, and by possessing those drugs and owning those drugs, Captain Larson did not, and he's not responsible. So let's go back to Ms. Larson a little bit. I want to talk about her testimony because it was a little bit hard to follow at times. It was a little bit all over the place, keeping times and dates, locations. What did she say this time? What did she say that time? Don't forget what I told you in the beginning. What's the backdrop of all of this? What are her motives? How does she feel about Captain Larson? Let's start with the issue of how the drugs actually came to the cops. The Metro police officers came in here. She testified that the police asked her about the weapons or drugs in the home almost immediately. And that's when she told them about the drugs. That's her testimony. But you heard from Detective Brown, and he was very clear. The officers, they briefly talked to Captain Larson. Then they went to Ms. Larson. Then they looked through the house. And after that, they went and spoke with Ms. Larson again. What did they tell her? The stories didn't match up. The stories didn't match up, and that is when Ms. Larson brought up the drugs. That's when she told the officers that there were drugs in the house. And despite her testimony to the contrary here, that essentially she was asked immediately about weapons and drugs in the house, and she told them immediately. Ms. Larson said as much in her previous statement to OSI. She admitted that she wrote in her statement, but when the cops told her the stories didn't match up, that's when she decided to report the drugs in the house. Because she was pissed, according to her. She was angry. She wanted to burn Captain Larson. Now, let's talk about Captain Larson's alleged use. What about Mount Charleston? She testified that the first time that she ever saw Captain Larson use mushrooms was on the way to a hike at Mount Charleston. That was her testimony here in this court-martial. And yet, despite talking to OSI how many times, at least 2, she never mentioned Mount Charleston as a location or event where they used, not prior to this court-martial. Despite the seminal event, right? It should be the first one that comes to mind when you say, I want you to list out, because most of us think chronologically, right? I want you to list out all the times and places you can think of. Okay. And you had an opportunity to hear what she has told the OSI. She lists out there, Mount Charleston was never mentioned, not a single time. She comes into this court-martial and she testifies that's when it happened. And I ask her, well, where were you when you saw it? She said it happened in the car on the way up to Mount Charleston. She testified they were coming from their home, but then she changed her testimony midway through and said that they were coming from Mr. Drug Dealer's parking garage because they brought drugs. Well, which is it, Miss Larson? Were you coming from your house or were you going from Mr. Drug Dealer's garage? I submit to you that the reason she can't keep these things straight is because she's making it up as she goes. She's just making it up on the fly. It's hard to keep your story straight when you're just kind of spitballing, when you're riffing what you're shooting from the hip and just kind of making it up. It gets difficult to keep your story straight. How many times did she say, well, I didn't get to see my interview. They lost it. It shouldn't matter. What's the truth? What is the truth? You don't need to review your previous statement. Why? So you can make sure that they match up? Just tell us the truth. Just tell us what you remember and what happened. How about the honeymoon use? Again, you would think a very seminal, very vivid, very distinct use in their mind, right? It's their honeymoon. They're in French Polynesia. She gets up on the stand and she testifies about all of these details about what happened. But again, prior to coming into this court-martial, when asked by the investigators, she never once listed her honeymoon, French Polynesia, as a time. Captain Larson never used, not once, not a single time. By locations, where did all of these drug deals happen? She testifies that the buys occurred in the parking garage, outside some townhouse or condo, and at festivals 3 times, 3 separate locations. But she told the defense during our interview that the buys happened once in a garage and twice at festivals. But then you have Mr. Drug Dealer come in here and he says that they only happened at a parking garage and festivals. There was never any buy at some townhome or condo or anything, according to him. So where's all this happening? Where is this all occurring? Again, she's just making it up as she goes. She's playing fast and loose with the facts, and it's hard to keep your story straight when you're doing that. Consider the fact that she has the motive to fabricate, and she's been inconsistent. These are things you can consider in weighing her credibility. How about her demeanor in court? She was confronted a number of times with inconsistent statements that she made, and at times she denied making statements initially. And then when confronted with them, when it was clear that she had actually made the statements, then she owned it. But she always had an excuse for why she made the prior inconsistent statements. She's got an answer for everything. She's got an answer for everything. She gets frustrated. She'd get annoyed at times. Fine, if you say that that's what I said, whatever. Right. And very often I told her, this is not me testifying here. I want to make sure that you can say what reality is. And there were a couple of times that she actually had the nerve to kind of laugh or snicker on the stand, like this was funny. One time in particular, I asked her about smashing Captain Larson's phone. She thought that was kind of funny. She got a chuckle out of it. Consider her demeanor here in this court-martial. Consider what's on the line for Captain Larson. Consider the fact that she came in here and just kind of snickered like it was funny. What is that? Take it in a vacuum. This is a big deal by itself. Maybe not. But when you consider her inconsistencies, when you consider her demeanor, when you consider her motive to fabricate and her clear, it doesn't matter, her clear, at this point, disdain for Captain Larson, it doesn't make a big deal. It's not a vacuum. These are real people. And these are reasons that people make accusations, false accusations. People seek revenge. It's a real thing. People seek to hurt people that they feel hurt them. And that's what Ms. Larson was doing here. One of the big things that frustrated Ms. Larson was talking about these letters that she had written. Constantly, not one, but two contradicting her testimony here in court. Now, she claims that Captain Larson pressured her into writing these letters, and the government's gone so far to charge that. But like everything else, there's absolutely no independent evidence supporting that proposition, other than Ms. Larson's own self-supporting testimony that that's what happened. It's self-interested, it's self-serving. And so those letters, they're absolutely imperative to weighing and assessing the validity and the credibility of Ms. Larson, as she is a linchpin, a keystone to the government's case. Despite everything that she has testified in this court-martial, in those letters, in contradiction to that testimony, she stated the drugs actually belonged to her. She has stated that she was the one using the drugs to treat her own anxiety, in the contradiction to her testimony. She has stated that she was trying to microdose with mushrooms, in contradiction of her testimony. Despite what Ms. Larson said here in court, she indicated in her letters that it was Captain Larson that was in fact sober because it was so imperative to her that he be able to watch over her when she was microdosing. Despite her in-court testimony here, she says, in fact, Captain Larson never used. Captain Larson never used mushrooms or drugs, period. Despite her court testimony, Ms. Larson absolutely, categorically stated that she, in fact, made her false allegations against Captain Larson in order to retaliate against Captain Larson and gain control under the circumstances that occurred on the 24th of February, 2018. The government wants you to believe that Captain Larson monitored these letters, that he essentially coached her on what to write, to try to somehow stop this investigation, to somehow put the brakes on it. But here's the thing. Those letters, they contained information that was authentic and genuine to Bree. How was the second letter addressed? To the commander, not the lieutenant colonel. He would never call Lieutenant Colonel his commander, but that's how it's addressed. It's a mistake that a civilian would understandably make when he's sitting there telling her, well, this is how you have to write it. And the other thing is, Ms. Larson, she accused Captain Larson of a number of additional offenses aside from mushroom possession. All right, this case isn't about those mushrooms sitting on that desk right there alone, right? What have we heard about LSD and Molly and all these other things? And the government went to great lengths to tell you that he's monitoring the investigation. He knows what he's in trouble for, according to the government. And yet, as he's coaching Ms. Larson allegedly to write these letters, he doesn't ever say anything about any of these other allegations, just to tell them the mushrooms weren't yours, right? Is that going to make the rest of this go away? Is that going to make this whole thing stop in its tracks? She's alleged a lot more than just the mushrooms. So if he's going to coach her, he needs to do some remedial training on how to coach somebody. If you're going to get somebody to say something that's going to get you in trouble, then maybe you should get them to actually say the things that will get you out of trouble, because there's a lot more than just the mushrooms. He never thinks once to tell her to broaden the scope of her retractions. Not in the first letter, not in the second letter. It just never crossed his mind, apparently. Right. But the government has painted this nefarious picture of Captain Larson hovering over Ms. Larson's shoulders, saying, write this and write that, make it go away. Well, apparently he didn't do a very good job. So you know, Ms. Larson's relationship with the truth, it's casual at best. Her relationship with the truth is whatever suits her at any given moment. And you heard that, and multiple times through her testimony. How many times when she was on the stand? Well, that wasn't true. I guess we'll just take her word for it that she's telling the truth here today. The reality is, we know based on all the information that the statements, all of them that she's put out in the universe, they can't all be true. She has lied, she has stated untruths, and that's the person the government puts on the stand and wants you to rely on large measure to convict Captain Larson. Her credibility is central to this case, and she doesn't have any. She's bankrupt on it. Now, let's talk about the little bit of forensic evidence in this case, the seized drugs, the scale. The government wants to jump up and down because it has a CSI moment, they think, in this case. They have fingerprints. We got a fingerprint. Singular. But don't get caught up in the hype of that. Don't lose the forest of the trees on this. They don't actually have any evidence that tells you how that fingerprint got there, when it got there. It wasn't like they dusted a mushroom or ecstasy pill. They dusted a bag, and they found one single print on the bag. Where did that bag come from? Is that the bag that Mr. Drug Dealer put it in? Is that a bag that Captain Larson had touched at some other point and it got put into that bag at some later date? That's the problem with this evidence, is they can't age a fingerprint. They can't tell you when a fingerprint got there. They can't tell you how it got there. And there isn't a fingerprint on something directly contraband. It's on a plastic bag. So don't get caught up in the hype of that. Be more critical than what the government wants you to be. Actually ask yourself, what can you determine based on that information? What about the scale? Let's fingerprint that. What would come back from it? We'll never know because it wasn't fingerprinted. What would that evidence have shown? OSI seemed to make a big deal out of the importance that scales play in drug activity, and yet they didn't ask to see fingerprints on that. Let's tie that to somebody. And the government's right. Dosing is important when it comes to drugs. And who was using? Ms. Larson was microdosing. She did need to know what she's putting into her body, what it is that she's essentially using. If they're dusted, maybe we'd know. And again, she didn't learn about microdosing from Captain Larson. She learned about that from a friend. One of the big problems with seized mushrooms is the amount of time that Ms. Larson was allowed to just wander free in the house. On the 24th of February, 2018, Ms. Larson says she happened to find the drugs in a suitcase. Lucky. How convenient. They had been in there since July 2017. And in February 2018, she happens to find them so that she can give them to the cops. Lucky. And nobody bothered to go with her. So we'll just have to take her word for it that that's what happened and that's where they came from. Remember, Captain Larson's nowhere in the house to contradict her. And then she's left in the house alone to her own devices. It was very clear between Metro and OSI that there was time when she was left alone in the house. There was. So let's talk about it. When you piece together that testimony, there was a period of time that she was left alone, and she talked about how she believed Captain Larson was putting mushrooms in place or drugs in the places that belonged to her, essentially trying to frame her. Doesn't that sound eerily similar to what happened here, just in reverse? If Ms. Larson is claiming that Captain Larson hid the mushrooms in question, could he have found a worse place to do it? The boat. This character who so nefariously tries to leave mushrooms in places that will frame her, he decides to put it in the boat of all places, with the engine compartment lid conspicuously left in a way that would raise suspicion. It's almost like begging to get caught. Begging to get caught. And this was not an issue of haste, because remember, the cops didn't show up unbeknownst to Captain Larson. Ms. Larson's not the only person to call the police that morning. So did Kevin Larson. So it wasn't like the police showed up on his doorstep and he was like, "Oh my God, the police are here. Where did they come from? Why are they here? I'm panicking." He knew they were coming. He called them. He called the police that morning. They didn't show up out of the blue. There was no panic. There was no, "What am I going to do?" Ms. Larson did what sounds so eerily familiar. She puts those drugs in a place that would look like Captain Larson was in possession of them. As for assault, the 24th of February 2018 incident, Ms. Larson testified very clearly here that her neck, her throat, that was never at any point implicated in any way, shape, or form on that day. Captain Larson didn't choke her. He didn't strangle her. He didn't touch her neck in any way, shape, or form. But what did you hear from Detective Brown? She told Detective Brown that day that she had been placed in a chokehold, but that wasn't true. In fact, she made it abundantly clear that never happened. Now, did Captain Larson touch Ms. Larson on the 24th of February? Absolutely he did. No denying that. But let's take it in context of what's going on there. Did Captain Larson come home wanting to fight somebody, drunk out of his mind, looking for a fight? Absolutely not. Ms. Larson started that fight. And despite Ms. Larson's animosity, aggression, she breaks things, Captain Larson did not want to engage with her. As we talked about earlier, she wasn't getting the response that she wanted. He had zero intentions to try to hurt her, to try to do anything to her. It's not until she escalates and she goes upstairs and she starts smashing his phone to pieces, something she thought was funny. Then she says that, "I heard him running up the stairs at this point, and it's none of those things that the government wants." Like, the government wants to paint like he pulled her out of the shower, she was in the shower, she said she jumped into the shower because it was the only way to escape from where she was. It was her only option out of where she could go. Now, Ms. Larson had already started to smash Captain Larson's phone into 1,000 pieces. Captain Larson doesn't hit her. He doesn't strike her. He doesn't scream at her. He doesn't do anything other than take her by the arm and put her in a bear hug again, very carefully, not to try to get her neck and not to do anything to her. He's trying to get her to calm down. That's it. So she stops smashing everything in the house. At this point, you've seen the pictures, right? She's thrown the whiteboard, she's broken the pot, she's smashed his phone. It's absolutely reasonable that at this point that Captain Larson thinks that he needs to calm her down with physical force in order to stop her from breaking his things. He never struck her. He took her down the stairs, and what did she say? Even when he pushed me outside, he told me to get in the car, because he wanted her to cool down, calm down, stop breaking everything. You could just see this in your mind. Like, stop being such a psycho. Look at your house. Look at what you're doing. Calm down. Sit in the car. Calm down. Nothing more. This wasn't some nefarious, he didn't strike her on the face. He didn't call her a bitch. He didn't want to hurt her. It wasn't an aggressive thing that he was trying to do. He used the amount of force that was needed to protect his property, to stop her from smashing the things to pieces. That's all. That's all it was. All right, then Miss Larson talks about this bruising. Well, that just goes back to the credibility with her, a credibility issue. The officer said they didn't see anything with her. Recognizing it may take some time for a bruise to show up, but there was no redness. There was nothing visibly discernible. And in the months after, she never thought to show somebody this alleged. You heard her talk about, oh, I have a photo of it. You never, it's February 2018. It's now January 2020. And no one ever asked you, you've never given this picture of this alleged bruise on your neck. We're just hearing about that on the second to last day of this court-martial. She's making it up. She just plays fast and loose with the facts. And this smashed phone incident from February 2017. If it wasn't so serious in its consequences, it would be kind of laughable, and here's why. Ms. Larson, she wants you to believe that she was on the phone with a 911 operator in the midst of making a report, and that in the midst of that report, Captain Larson snatches the phone out of her hands, breaks the phone, and the call goes dead. When the person on the other line was the 911 operator, and then it takes forever for the police to get there. She said she's gone back in the house at that point. She's relaxing for the evening. She's shut it down. Really? In the middle of a 911 call that suddenly goes dead, and the police just take their sweet merry time to get there? Common sense. This is the kind of thing where the police are going to show up in a hurry, because when somebody's making a 911 call and the call suddenly goes dead, that raises concern. But apparently, not here in Las Vegas. She does say that the police came. Well, can we hear from an officer? Is there a police report? Is there anything to substantiate or corroborate that claim? Zero. She's just making it up as she goes. Put that aside. Never mind the fact that it just didn't happen. Is it really that hard to... First of all, Ms. Larson is not a human breathalyzer. She says that Captain Larson was too drunk to drive. That's her opinion. That's her opinion. But is it really that hard to believe that Captain Larson may have gotten upset because if he feels that he's okay, he's not breaking the law, and his wife still calls the police on him? Is that too hard to believe he would say, if you do that again, I'm going to leave you? Is that conduct unbecoming of an officer? To say if you use the police as a weapon, I will leave you? You can't control somebody like that. You can't try to have leverage over somebody like that. And then when you fight back in a completely appropriate way, saying, I will end our marriage, I will leave you if you do that again, say that's conduct unbecoming? That's too much. Captain Larson absolutely is entitled to believe that his wife wrongfully called the police on him in an effort to control him. She did say that they were in the midst of an argument and tell her, if you do that again, I'm out of here, I'm gone. That's not unreasonable. That's not beyond the bounds of what we accept from an officer. Finally, the false official statement. Captain Larson, he didn't testify in this court-martial, and you can't use that against him. But you've heard from Captain Larson. You have heard that he had the courage to go into his commander's office. He had his rights read to him. He knew he did not have to make that statement. They didn't seek it from him. He provided it to them. He voluntarily waived his rights and made a statement. And he told the lieutenant colonel, he told them what happened. He was forthright. Did he try to avoid everything? No. He said, I don't know some people. I've got friends. They call me. I try. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't try to make himself out to be a choir boy, but he did deny. He said, I did not use drugs. I did not purchase drugs. I did not distribute drugs. He was resolute, according to the lieutenant colonel, in that assertion. He told them that he doesn't physically take part in drug transactions. You've heard from Captain Larson, and he has categorically denied that he was involved in anything that Ms. Larson has alleged against him. Bottom line, remember why we're here. We're here for one very simple reason. Ms. Larson's anger, her jealousy, her need to get back at Captain Larson. There's been a lot of speculation, a lot of innuendo, but ultimately, there's very little substance to the allegations that have been made against Captain Larson. It's a case built on emotion and immunity. It's riddled with uncertainties, and here we find ourselves. As you go back to deliberate in the next little bit, Captain Larson, the defense, we would ask you to keep three things in mind: skepticism, criticality, and being demanding. Why skeptical? skeptical of any allegation that's made of Captain Larson because the law demands that you presume Captain Larson to be innocent. This is not a fair fight. We do not start with the scales tipped evenly between guilt and innocence, but instead they are tipped completely in favor of Captain Larson's innocence, and it's the government's obligation to prove otherwise. So, any allegations on that charge sheet as you're looking at it, you have to be skeptical, and you have to say that you have got to prove it. I don't take anything for granted. I start from the proposition that he's innocent. The second, criticality, and I don't mean to be critical in a way that means being displeasurable or unpleasant to be around, but being critical of the government's case, because the burden here is the highest burden known to the law. The military judge talked to you about certain proceedings where it might be enough to show that something's more likely than not. This is not standing here. It is beyond a reasonable doubt. You must be firmly convinced that Captain Larson has done something wrong to convict him. You have to be able to say that the government has eliminated all real possibility that he's innocent. They have to eliminate all of those before you could find Captain Larson guilty of anything. So make sure that when you're back there, that you're critical of the government's case, that you pull it apart, strip it down to its nuts and bolts, and say, can I put this back together? And when I do, is the only way to rebuild it by finding that the only thing that's possible here is that Captain Larson committed crimes? And the defense would submit to you that the government's case will not withstand that kind of criticality, and it will not withstand that kind of critical assessment, that type of critical eye, that dispassionate review of the evidence that Captain Larson is counting on from you. Lastly, be demanding. When we say demanding, it's the government's burden. They brought this case. Anything that you're left with saying, I wouldn't like to have known this, I would like to have known that, that's on them. They brought this case. So if there's information that you want, you should be demanding and say, that's the government's fault. You should have given that to me so I can make a decision here. There's nothing wrong with that. Captain Larson's counting on it. All right. Despite all the things that he's had to sit here and listen to over the last couple of days, over the last couple of months, the last couple of years, he's counting on you to finally be the people to look at this case and say, speculation and innuendo is not going to get you there. That's enough. Talk that house of cards. Make it come falling down. Provide Captain Larson closure in this incident, on this whole issue, and find him not guilty of all charges and specifications in this case.